Before the video starts, I just want to give a big thank you to Simon for sitting down and doing this interview with me. He's a very talented person, so make sure you go check him out on Twitter. The links will be in the description. You can also find his Spotify link down there, a link to GTFO, and a link to the Den of Wolves game, so you can wishlist it now. Thank you, and enjoy the video. Hello everyone, and welcome back to another video. I'm extremely excited to be bringing you another interview today, as I'm currently sat here with the amazing, the super talented and extremely hardworking Simon Viklund. Simon, welcome to the channel, and thank you for choosing to do this interview with me, man. It means a lot.
Thanks for having me.
A lot of people on this channel might know you from composing the music for Payday the Heist, Payday 2, GTFO. You were also the voice of Bane, so you've had your fingers in a lot of pies in the gaming industry, and you were also the narrative director for GTFO, 10 Chambers, the game designer. Yeah, you've had your fingers in a lot of pies. Is there anything else that you'd like to introduce to the people about yourself?
Well, I don't think that I made some music for a few smaller projects when I was freelancing between 2015 and 2019 or 2017 maybe. So people should check out those games as well. Pan is one of them that I really enjoyed making the sound effects and music for.
I looked at your discovery on Wiki, and you've done a lot of trailer music as well. I've noticed I noticed you did trailer music for Dead by Daylight a few years ago.
I did, yeah, but that's pretty much the only trailer music I've made as a consultant. Otherwise, it's all trailer music for games that I've been working on as part of the company that makes that game.
So how did you get into creating music? And do you remember the first piece of music you worked on?
Well, I grew up in a home where my mom played the piano a lot, and my dad, even though he didn't play instruments anymore, I knew that he had played the saxophone and the clarinet, and it was just a musical household of sorts. And then I got into playing the piano for a few years in middle school, and then I turned to guitar when I was approaching high school.
And do you remember the first piece of music you actually composed, whether that be for like a band or a game?
Well, I had a band with my friend Henrik, and we recorded some stuff when I was like in 8th grade, 9th grade, maybe. I don't remember exactly, but no, we were older. Yeah, that must have been after high school, actually.
What kind of music did that band make?
We made instrumental. We called ourselves Orbot, and we made instrumental music where I played the piano and he played the bass, and we made some experimental music. I programmed some drums and stuff. But we never had a show or anything. Like we didn't have gigs, so to speak.
And did any certain artists inspire that kind of that the music that you made with your friend there, or just your music in general?
Yeah, well, we were both huge fans of grunge music. We both listened a lot to Pearl Jam and Alice in Chains and Soundgarden and stuff like that. But I had turned him on to electronic music, like Square Pusher and other sort of drum and bass, like fusion between electronic music and live instruments and stuff. So I guess that was part of the appeal as well.
Is that what kind of got you into the route of composing, where you thought, I could use this instrumental to compose stuff for soundtracks for medias?
No, I didn't have the dream really of working as a composer or producer at that point, really. But I was sort of just slipped into that when I started high school. I pirated a piece of software called Fast Tracker 2 that you could use to piece together samples in different pitches and play like fragments of sounds and stuff. And if other people had produced music in that same piece of software, you could so easily sort of reverse engineer it and find out, this sort of a rhythm they make like this. If you had triplets, you would find out exactly what sort of number comment, like you would put in little number combinations and letters to sort of tell the program to play the sounds back in certain ways. And you could reverse engineer other people's music. So it was a great program to start with and sort of learn the ropes of making electronic music. But it didn't have oscillators or anything like that, so I never learned how to really program and create sounds from scratch. Telling like a software synthesizer how to make the sounds that I wanted it to make. But it was a sampler sort of thing where you played back sounds, and that's what I started with in high school. And as I was messing around with that, my friend Ulf, who I'd learned get to know from high school, he quit high school and started a company with his brother, and they were looking to make games and see if they could get like an investor and start something for real. And they were looking for investors, I guess, and didn't really have money to sort of run the company properly and pay people's salaries. I was just sort of helping out in my spare time on weekends and evenings, making some music and stuff for their demos.
And Ulf was one of the original founders of Overkill, which Overkill's first game was Payday the Heist. When did Ulf come to you about the idea for Payday?
Well, he was before Overkill there was Grin, and at Grin I helped make a lot of games, mostly as a composer or sound designer, lead sound designer, sort of. And that company sadly went bankrupt in 2009, and then after that, we started Overkill Software. As the few guys from Grin that had just went belly up, essentially. And at first, we were making apps and games for cell phones, essentially, because that was quite new back then, and we saw how the market got, would slowly get flooded, as is the case now for sure. But this is like, what is it? 16 years ago.
Yeah, so you've been in the biz for like 23 years, I think.
Well, yeah, I mean, I joined Grin in 2000, so I've been working with games for 25 years. But after we had tried to make some apps, we were just throwing ideas around. Some were just crazy and others were good. But we were working on that, and Ulf just came into the office. He came into the cellar or the basement where we were, that we had set up as an office, where the fuse would be overpowered, or like it was shut down the entire electricity for the entire basement if someone would like run the microwave at the same time as all the computers. So whenever you started the microwave to heat some food, you'd have to tell everyone to save their work, because there was a risk of all the computers just shutting down because of the microwave. Anyway, he just came into that place one morning and said, essentially, I've been thinking we shouldn't make apps because it's not what we do best. At that point, we had been working for 9-10 years, with making what we considered proper games, for standalone, game machines or PC, and we didn't feel like it was our wheelhouse to make apps, really. And he just sort of put a spotlight on that, maybe that was something that everyone had felt, I certainly did. Like, I felt a relief when Ulf just came in and said, this is not what we do best. Let's get back to making a real game for PC or potentially consoles in the future. We'll see where we end up. But let's make a first-person shooter game. But let's be clever about it so that we can make something, that looks like it's made by more people than it's actually made by. So we looked at Left 4 Dead. Ulf's elevator pitch was essentially, let's make Left 4 Dead, but replace the zombies with police and SWAT. So yeah, that was Payday, and the cops versus robbers sort of conflict. The concept of it just felt so ripe for, or like underappreciated or underused at least in games. We had Kane and Lynch, and you had a little bit, dabbling with that stuff in the Grand Theft Auto games, of course. But other than that, there wasn't a lot of that stuff. While there was a lot of like Aliens versus Space Marines, and there was a lot of, I don't know what other, maybe Axis of Evil versus Allies in World War II. There was a lot of that stuff, but Cops and Robbers is such a classic sort of concept. So we just thought, it's just too good to pass on. Like let's make something. It felt like we were onto something that could become something big,
So that's interesting, because even now, with the cops and robbers conflicts in games, I can even just still now just only think of a handful of franchises that have explored that. And I think Payday is definitely one of the most successful franchises at exploring that concept in its entirety, because even after Payday you had Battlefield Hardline.
Yeah.
But again, it's a really good idea, and I think, yeah, you really did stumble upon something there. I was going to ask did you think it would become this absolutely huge franchise? Because I'd consider it a staple of the gaming industry these days.
There was no way in the early days, of Payday the Highest that we would ever think that it would become this big.
When did the name Payday come into form? How early into development was the game when someone suggested the name Payday, and what was the? I mean, I could probably guess the lore behind the name of the franchise, but if there's a story behind that, then I think that'd be interesting too.
Yeah, there's absolutely a story behind the name of the franchise, because the development time for Payday the Heist was extremely short. It was like 18 months or something like that, and we were heading to E3 in 2011. And the game was almost done, and we were. The plan was to go to E3, have, announce essentially that we existed as a company, and announce that we had a game and that it was playable at E3 that year, so people could play it. Not just behind closed doors, but actually, people on the floor could play the game, and that the game will be released, I think, within 2 months of E3, which is very rare, because usually you want to build hype and let people know that you have something in the works. But we came to E3, and won a lot of. We would end up winning a lot of sort of like best surprise of E3, or like best newcomer or whatever, like, because we were flying under the radar, essentially coming to E3 with a game that was this, close to being finished. And up until that point, I think it was like maybe less than a week until we were flying over to Los Angeles from Stockholm. We found out that, because we'd called the game Stone Cold, that was the name of the game at that point. And then we found out that we were collaborating with Sony Online Entertainment at that point to put the game out on PlayStation as well, PlayStation 3. And some clever person at Sony had come up with the idea of checking whether Stone Cold Stone Cold Steve Austin was fine with us using that name. And of course, if you ask, they're gonna turn you down, you know, or they're gonna ask for a lot of money. So why ask? You know, that was at least our philosophy, you know. So they sort of opened a can of worms there, you know, legally, and we just had to come up with a new name and print new merch for the E3 trip with less than a week to go. And then we were sort of like just sort of butting our heads against the walls, essentially trying to come up with new names, you know. And I remember I wrote all the good ideas down so that I could save them, the unused names for the franchise itself, or for the game. It wasn't a franchise at that point, but for the game itself. I would use those names for titles for the songs in the game. So some suggestions were, one of the songs is called Crime Wave. So that was an idea for the name of for the game, actually. But I remember Bo, he came up with Payday. No. Here's the thing. He was the one that added the heist. Because he was like, it needs to say that it's a heist game, you know, and that will put ideas in people's heads about what it's about, you know, breaking into places, taking hostages, and all of those elements that we had in the game, which was very true, you know. So that was a marketing thing, you know, to get the word the heist, or the word heist essentially into the title. But yeah, we were like racking our heads trying to come up with a name, and then the programmer Martin just popped his head in the door and said, "Payday," you know, sort of like, how about Payday, you know? And then everyone was like, "Whoa," you know, everyone's, you know, heads just sort of like tilted a little bit,
like a light bulb.
Yeah, tilted to the sides, you know, everyone's heads tilted to the sides, and we're like thinking about it and like, yeah, Payday, that's really good, you know, because it's the payday of the people who are breaking into those places, you know, they're stealing money, you know. And then Bo added the heist, you know. So Martin came up with Payday, and Bo added the heist. So Payday the heist, and yeah, the rest is history, I guess.
That's a really interesting story, and I'm glad that you mentioned that it was going to be called Stone Cold, because when you mentioned the soundtrack, I immediately thought that there is. I think it's the soundtrack for the Green Bridge heist. I think that's the one that's titled Stone Cold.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Yes.
Thanks.
So that got repurposed into a soundtrack title.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think Crime Wave was one of those that I suggested. That's why I remember it. Like, I thought that was a good name, but obviously, Crime Wave doesn't necessarily allude to heists or robberies. It could be like assault or anything. So it wasn't necessarily a good title, you know. Because it can have connotations, you know, different connotations, you know, for different people, like depending on your experience and stuff. So I get it, you know.
So you came up with the name. Did you come up with the character names? Did they have to be changed at all? Because there's Dallas. How did you come up with the names for the characters and like the personalities behind them? I think one of them being Wolf is quite obvious with Ulf having voiced him. Yeah, I believe. Ulf.
Yeah, they were all different. Yeah, I think Ulf or maybe Bo came up with Dallas, you know, and that was just sort of like, it had a nice ring to it. And then when Ulf, it was decided, essentially, we were recording ourselves as placeholder voices for the characters, and then when we were replacing the characters later on with actual voice actors, we couldn't find someone who could scream as well as Ulf, and we just figured, well, let's just save some money and actually have Ulf be the character. So that was sort of like a way to save a little bit of money and also just make sure that, you know, we knew that when you push that button, when you push F, you know, on the keyboard, and you're screaming at the hostages or at the enemies, or you know, shouting at your teammates to help you out when you're bleeding out and stuff like that, it's like the equivalent of your weapon sounding like a pea shooter if your voice isn't powerful when you're screaming. You know, you want you press F, you want it to be like get down, really, projecting and really, and not a lot of voice actors want to do that, or can do that, they're making their life, their livelihood is their voice. So they don't want to ruin their voice during a recording session. So it takes a special type of voice actor who can actually commit to it, So we were auditioning a lot of voice actors, and we figured it would be good if we recorded them in London, because London would be the city where we could find people from, who speak English well while not being in a completely different time zone, because it's like I think 1 or maybe 2 hour difference from Stockholm to London, and we could find Americans there, we thought, and then it's some of them could be, they can have different accents, one of them could be from England or UK, so that's how we ended up working with the voice actors that we did, and Ulf was one of the robbers, and then I did the voice of the person sort of leading the gang, because that was another way to just make production easier. Because if we had to change anything in the level design, like, oh, we can't have you run up the stairs and zip line to the next building. We have to change that because we couldn't make the zip line work, gameplay wise, whatever. Like the animations didn't work, or we couldn't make that for any technical reason. We couldn't do the thing that we thought we could do. Let's have them run to run down the stairs instead, and into the garage or something like that, and get picked up by a truck or something. So then we had to change the script and have the re-record those lines. And if we were working with a professional voice actor, that would necessitate, we would have to book an hour in the studio, because you can't book less than an hour. In the US, actually, you have to book 2 hours at least, so you have to pay the engineer, you have to pay the voice actor, obviously, for an hour or 2 hours in the US, and then it was just too much, and you would have to essentially either sort of waste 50 minutes or wait until you had enough that you needed to re-record to warrant booking 1 hour or 2 hours. So you couldn't. It was easier just having Bane be recorded by someone in the studio, So it fell upon me, So I just found a different voice to sort of. I knew I wanted the distortion to sort of have some high frequency content in the voice to latch onto, essentially, in order for the distorted voice to really cut through the mix, because we didn't have very sort of sophisticated mixing capabilities. So I wanted the voice to really cut through. So I added some hoarseness, or like sort of a wheezy sort of quality to it. That's Bane's voice up here.
Oh, wow.
So when I do this is Bane's voice. So I wanted it to be less a little bit more breathy, I guess, or less of the full voice, but it's really hard to scream and sort of emote and have a lot of emotions and raise your voice and sound panicked and stuff like that as Bane. But we just figured, I mean, he's off-site. He's not with the robbers in the middle of the action, so he can be this sort of outside, all-knowing force that just sort of like, he keeps calm when everything is going down the drain or whatever, like when it's going crazy, and they're shooting at the cops and the cops are shooting back. Bane keeps his calm, so I wouldn't have to stretch. I mean, it's not like I have a lot of acting chops either, so it was just good to have a character that was sort of like not necessarily emotionless, but level-headed, exactly. But regarding the names, which you asked about, it was just sort of like different ideas for different characters, because it was Ulf doing one of the voices, then Wolf just made sense, and then Hoxton I was just looking around London, and then I saw like a map of London, and then I saw Hoxton like is a borough or like a part of. I don't know if it's counted if it's central London or whatever, but it's part of. Maybe it's a suburb. I can't recall exactly. You might know better than me, but I just thought that it had a cool ring to it. Hoxton sounded cool, but then we cast Pete Gold, for the voice of that character, when we had already sort of recorded other people addressing him as Hoxton. So we had to stick to Hoxton and just figured like Pete Gold's from Sheffield. So we said, I remember, can you the character's from the dodgy end of Sheffield, and I remember Pete Gold saying there's no non-dodgy end of Sheffield. But I had to what's the word? Not retrograde, retrofit,
Retroact? Maybe? I want to Google it. Retroact.
We're spending too much time on this. Yeah. Anyway, I just came up with the idea. Like maybe he was a criminal. The character of Hoxton was a criminal who was known for always evading the police, but then he finally got caught in Hoxton. So that's why he got the nickname Hoxton, you know. So we were just sort of like winging it with this stuff, you know, and having to sort of catch the errors that we made, you know. And one of those things that someone pointed out was, you know, Chains and that being the only black guy in the group, and, you know, with that character being American and the history of American slavery, it's weird to call him Chains. And I hadn't even thought about that aspect, honestly. That was, I mean, maybe that's just because I'm a, like, naive Swede that is sort of like far away from the US in a way, and that culture. But so that was a good catch, obviously, for people. But that by then that people, you know, the game was already out. So I have to admit that just sort of slipped through the net somehow. I just thought that Chains, because I was looking at the other names at that point. I think maybe we had all the other names in place. Like Wolf doesn't have a sharp consonant sound. F sort of cuts through, but it's not a T or an S that really cuts through. Hoxton has that, you know, sound in the middle. Dallas has the D, which is a nice sort of what's it called, like a plosive sound in the beginning, and then the S at the end. So I was like more looking at the structure of the sound, you know, and I just thought that the word chains has a nice like in the beginning, you know, would sort of fit with. It was just sort of me trying to think of how they sounded, you know, and making sure that they sounded different, you know. So I'll take that upon myself to that slipped through, you know. And I apologize if someone were offended in any way, but that certainly was not the intent or the intention.
I think that's really interesting with how the names, because you'd never think it would go into that much detail on how the names are provided to the characters, but it makes sense after that you said it, because it's like, especially with all the gunfire and all that happening around you, you want to be able to know that the character's saying the person's name. You don't want it to be mixed up with another character. Yeah. So that's really interesting.
Yeah, it's I guess it's the sound designer in me, sort of like having the sound designer approach more so than a storyteller approach, you know. But then, you know, you can sort of retrofit, you know, make everything, you know, somehow. And in the beginning, we didn't even think, or I at least didn't think that Dallas would be the leader. I just thought that, you know, he was sort of. I made a backstory for the first game where he was sort of a loner who ran, I think, an underground shooting range where he met a lot of criminal people, you know. So he was sort of running that shooting range, and that's how he sort of built up like a network of people. But he was sort of a loner, and I actually think that if you find that story somewhere written down, maybe, I don't know if it's written down anywhere in the inside the actual game, like in a menu where you can go in and read about the characters or anywhere, but maybe we posted on the Steam forums or something like that. I have no idea. But I remember thinking that he was sort of a sad character because he was so lonely, really. And then we sort of like, it was essentially his mask being the most iconic, I think, with the American flag on it, that made him sort of the the leader, not so much how I wrote the backstory. So we had to change the backstory, I think. So it's been malleable, and or it has been forced to be malleable essentially, because it's been changing over time, just as a reaction to other, the public's reaction essentially to the game and the characters and the storytelling. So it's always been sort of like just rolling with whatever feels like it's working in terms of how the developers feel about the property, but also how the fans feel about it.
First World's Bank was the first level that you created, I believe. But when it came to making levels, how would you would you make the level and then compose the soundtrack for it to try and fit the level? Or I feel like, because that would be more up to your speed, where you'd see the level and go, right, this needs a slower soundtrack, or something quite fast like Heat Street.
Most of the time we had something that was playable by the time I started working on the music, because we had some prototype levels that never really got off the ground, and it never really turned into something that was that where we were sure it was going to end up in the game. So there was no point in making music too early on, because you wouldn't know until we'd come quite far with the gameplay experience of that map, of any given map, before it was certain that it would end up in the game. So I wouldn't work on the music too early.
Eventually, after I think it was just before the release of Payday 2, I could be wrong, or it's about a year before, you did No Mercy, which was a collaboration with Valve. How did that collaboration come about, and how was it like daunting to create the music for that level, because you were working with the company that you'd kind of not based your game on, but were inspired by Left 4 Dead?
That was a full circle moment, for sure. I can't remember exactly how that ended up being. I'm not really the right person to ask, but if I recall correctly, we've always had really good connections at Valve, with releasing on Steam and stuff. So we, I think we approached them, and then they were so cool, and just sort of like let us actually, they set over, 3D models and stuff from the actual, that let us use content from Left 4 Dead, the actual map, so that we can sort of use that as a basis for the map. And I remember contacting the composer for Left 4 Dead, or whoever was sort of the head honcho for music at Valve, or I can't remember his name right now, but he was very, very approachable and kind. I found him on LinkedIn, and I asked him straight out, like, can I use the theme from Left 4 Dead or from that map, and sort of incorporate that into the music I'm making for this map? And he would say, yeah, sure, and we didn't write a contract or anything, so I just trusted that was fine, and then put it in the game. And so far they haven't sued us, so I guess I found the right guy, and that he was sort of stood by his word. So they were very, very cool and approachable, and not, too protective of their stuff. They were very, very generous.
What's the trickiest part of composing a soundtrack for a level, or just because you've dabbled in the game design as well, what's the trickiest part of making a level for a game like Payday?
Matt,
Tough question.
yeah, it is. Well, there's no recipe for making the music for anything, really. Obviously, if you're making something that is stressful, you want to have music that has a certain pulse to it, But there's 100 million different ways to do that, and gradients between, like, do you go for straight like EDM inspired stuff like drum and bass like I did, or do you sort of go more towards film and cinematic music, which is can still have electronic elements to it, but maybe is not as melodic, and certainly doesn't have the sort of drum loops and stuff, but more like I don't know, analog synthesizer pulses that is just sort of stuff. and layer that with maybe some percussion that is not sampled, but actually sort of like live percussion, just to make it more, or should I say, less identifiable as a typical sort of type of music. It's not ethnic. It's not electronic. It's not fully acoustic. It has electronic elements, but it's not fully electronic. It's not, you know, style-wise. I think cinematic music is sort of agnostic, style agnostic in a way. Its focus is mostly to just evoke emotions, you know. And I never really had the idea. I'm not. I can do that, but I don't think it's my forte really. So my first approach for Stone Cold, as it was called at the beginning, was to make rock music and have a lot of guitars and live drums and stuff. Because it felt like it was sort of a punky, you know, with the characters being, you know, raising their middle finger towards the law and everything. It was just sort of like, it felt punk in a way. It wouldn't be punk music, but it would be rock, you know, and sort of that kicking ass, taking names, sort of badass feel to it, you know, that I wanted the game to have. It would be fun, you know. It was about criminals, but it was supposed to be the criminals as heroes, and them being not necessarily Robin Hood, but like sticking it to the man in a way, and you know, that was the attitude. But then I just gravitated towards something more electronic, and now I've forgotten what the question was.
It was just about the trickiest part of composing a soundtrack, but yeah, like you said, there's no straight answer.
Yeah.
What about creating the actual level? Was there, like, how many variations? A lot. I think there's, how many levels are there in Payday the Heist? There's
the Green Bridge. You have Heat Street. You have First World Bank. You have the deal in the drug dealer house.
Heat Street and Undercover,
yeah. Wasn't Undercover one of those
DLCs?
DLCs, exactly, yeah. Well, anyway, it's about 6 or 7 total, I think.
And so how many times would you revise themes on those levels, or did they initially just stick to the theme where you thought, oh, let's make a drug deal level where you saw the panic room out of the building? Would it always just stick through that, or did that just kind of go through some variations on different levels?
Well, are you talking about the scenario or the music?
Just the scenario. So like going to the drug deal.
Yeah, I wasn't involved in that stuff really. It was mostly, I think, Ulf and Ilya, the head sort of level designer guy, and Bo was quite involved in that stuff as well, coming up with ideas for, you know, how to make it, you know, make the most of the technology that we had, spawning enemies, you know, and having them come to the skylights and through windows and you know, through doors, and just making it so that it felt like every map would open up like a Swiss cheese, and you never knew exactly where the enemies would come from, so that you can play it several times and it would be a little bit different every time. They were really working hard and sort of playing over and over and over and over again, and just sort of fine-tuning that stuff to make it fun, even, you know, the 50th time you play the map, you know. But they were really racking their brains trying to come up with ideas, and we didn't want to make any maps where you would run from A to B. Heat Street was the exception, but we wanted to make maps that were at least, you know, folded onto themselves in a way where you would, you know, First World Bank is a great example, because you come in there and it's like pristine and you know, with the customers waiting in line and stuff, and then you shoot up the place and you're running back and forth. You need to find the key and the whatever, the acid or whatever it is that you use to burn through the into the vault, and then you need to get to the vault and stuff. So you're running back and forth through that lobby of the bank several times, and every time there's more glass on the floor, there's more bullet holes in the walls, and it's sort of evolving over time. And we're making the most of quite a, you know, few square meters of level, because you're running back and forth in the same place. It's the same with the drug deal map. It's up and down the same building, you know, where the action happens changes over time depending on where the engine essentially decides to spawn enemies, and the players are forced to move there and try to stop the enemies, you know, protecting the what do you call it, the hostages and stuff, while trying to complete objectives and so on. So it was, you know, the way we looked at it was like, we don't have the resources to make maps the way Call of Duty makes maps. I'm speaking of Call of Duty as if it's a company developing games, but the way any developer making Call of Duty games, you know, makes maps for Call of Duty, for the single player campaign I'm talking about now, where it's like, you know, roller coaster, and you run down a street and then you come to this intersection and then you see a helicopter coming, you know, flying above, and a rocket is you know, shot from the ground up and into that helicopter, and it crashes into a building, and then that building topples over, and it's like you're in the middle of this action sequence, and there's new stuff happening all the time, and you're moving to the next place, and you're in a shanty town, and then suddenly, you know, there's so much content, you're just running through it, you know, and it's sort of wasteful in a way. We couldn't be that wasteful because we were such a small company, so we would make like one detailed bank, and then you would spend 40 minutes in that bank, and we would have to come up with stuff to do over and over in that same, you know, place essentially. So we would have to be work very smart with the content. That was the idea, you know. So Heat Street was the exception, where we made something where it wasn't really, you know, with the way we spawned enemies and stuff, it wasn't really made to work with that sort of a map where you're running ahead, running, and then enemies are spawning in front of you and behind you, and making sure that was fun and worked technically, you know. So but somehow I think that map also works, you know.
So, that's really interesting. I don't actually know a game that has a similar playstyle like that, where you stay in one detailed building for a considerable amount of time.
Yeah, it was just us trying to be looking at the team. Like, we have such a small team, and we can't create that much content with rooms and corridors and furniture and like content to fill up these places and making them detailed and interesting. Let's just tell a story that takes place in one, like a few floors of a building or something, and then just run back and forth up and down, like in the drug deal map that I can't remember the name of right now, but you know, so mostly like that, and mostly, you know, even Green Bridge, you run in one direction and then you run back the same way, and I think you run further back where you started, but still it's the same principle.
Going back to having composed music for games, a lot of games and medias, like Dead by Daylight for that trailer, is that kind of what inspired you to jump to horror related games like GTFO?
Well,
how did that transition happen?
That wasn't really, you know, I didn't have a hand in deciding that would be a horror game. I was just one of the founders of 10 Chambers, and then it was decided, Ulf said, you know, our wheelhouse is making first-person shooter co-op games like Left 4 Dead, or, you know, more accurately, like Payday, because we worked on Ulf and I and Anders, one of the other founders, had worked on the Payday games, Payday the Heist and Payday 2. And we just figured that's the realm, that's the space, you know, where we want to work, because we know that stuff, you know. And then was just a question of how do we differentiate our next project or our next game from what we've worked on before. What can we do to find a niche, you know? And Ulf said, we'll make it hardcore. It will be super, super hard, like very, you know, unapologetically hardcore, you know, rage quit inducing, you know, that's, let's make, because
like Hotline Miami.
Yeah, we'll find something that is you know, it'll find its audience. That was the idea, you know. So if you make a game for everyone, it's for no one, because it's too diluted, you know. So the idea was to make something that you know, few people will enjoy, but those who do, they will love it, because it's something for them that no other game can give them, so that was the idea. And then the idea of making it horror sort of came as a direct result of the decision to make something hardcore, because the horror atmosphere in itself, I mean, when something's really, really difficult, that's like horror in gameplay form.
Yeah,
that's horror for you as a gamer, because you're trying to survive, and it's hard in this game. So it's like horror for you, because it's gonna kick your ass. The game's gonna kick your ass, So when we dressed it up in horror, it just made sense, when it's a game where you're supposed to stick together and count your bullets because you're running out of ammo all the time, and you need to help one another. Let's make a game where the atmosphere and the music and the lighting and everything points to the fact that you need to stick together. So it's like the music actually helps tell you how to beat the game, or have a greater chance at least of beating the game, because the horror atmosphere makes you want to stick together because it's creepy, and then when you stick together, that's when you have the greatest chance of beating the game.
So how do you go about testing a game, like a super hard game? Do you just have like no choice to get really good at your own game, or do you kind of modify if you're testing a level or testing a certain feature or an asset? Do you just kind of modify, like give yourself like God mode or something like that? I've always wondered that.
Yeah, I mean, you have the engine, so you don't necessarily start the game as a standalone game. You can free flight to any place in the map and just drop down and play from that point. And of course, you have cheats like infinite ammo, kill all the enemies in a certain radius around you as a player. Spawn new enemies. Maybe in random places. God mode, stuff like that. So yeah, the different aspects or different elements in the game have to be tested in different ways, obviously. If someone says, oh, the music, the action, this is close to me because I work with music. If someone says, the action music is too repetitive, it needs to be a longer loop with more variation because it's too repetitive. I'm a little bit like, oh, but do you play with God mode? Yeah. Then you survive for too long and you hear the repetition of the music. If you play the game for real, you will survive a fight and kill the enemies, or they will kill you before you actually grow tired of the music. So that's just one example of how playing with those cheats would ruin or like give you a false idea of what's wrong.
Do you have a favourite track that you've worked on for any game, like GTFO, Payday, or even just on your SoundCloud? Because I know some of the tracks in Payday actually were from, I think, in the Diamonds heist. The party music was like, I think that was just some music he'd composed and put on SoundCloud.
Yeah, it's actually available on Spotify and stuff. It's called Orbot. I borrowed the name from my friend Hendrix and my band from our high school years, essentially, and called that EP with 6 tracks, Orbot. But yeah, I took some of those tracks that felt like maybe this could be played on a dance floor, and then I put that as background music for the DJ to play at the party in Diamond Heist. Yeah. And Diamond Heist obviously is another great example of a map that's just sort of folded on top of itself, where you're running back and forth in this limited, few, office rooms, and then the ceiling or the rooftop. In Swedish, the ceiling and roof are not different words. That's why I'm using the wrong term here. But the roof would be the thing you stand on. So yeah, the rooftop and the office space.
Have you ever considered performing music live, or have you performed music live?
No, it's not my thing, really. I don't want to be in this. I don't want to enjoy being the center of attention, really, and sort of performing live is not my passion, really.
I was just curious because of the DJ thing, and it does sound like very good club music, especially that track "Give You My All," I think is the name of it. Yeah, I'll give you my all. I always just thought that's in my Spotify playlist, and I always thought this is a pretty good club track. So I always wondered if you'd ever performed it live.
No, but that was made to be like a pop sort of house inspired pop track, or a pop inspired house track.
That became very popular. Yeah, that was very popular in the Payday community because it got remixed as well, I believe, in Payday 2.
Yeah, as a lot of music did actually, because when we put the Payday the Heist maps into Payday 2, I did sort of reinterpretations of the music for those tracks, or for those maps rather, in Payday the Heist. So I remade the music for Payday 2, which was a lot of fun, sort of like coming up with a different approach to or like a different take on the riffs and the lead synthesizers and the sort of most recognizable elements from those old tracks, and trying to turn them into something new.
And I guess I'll close this out on a final question, as my alarm wants to keep shouting at me. Is there a game that currently exists, or like a franchise even, that you would love to compose tracks for? Any game that you would absolutely just love to?
Well, I am working on Den of Wolves now. That's the next game being developed at 10 Chambers. So, and that's a dream project because it's like Payday. It's a power fantasy, and it was a lot of fun making sort of the opposite of a power fantasy, or making the music for something that is the opposite of a power fantasy in GTFO. But Den of Wolves is very much a power fantasy where, again, you're kicking ass and taking names, and you're on the wrong side of the law, and you're dangerous and moving in the shadows, and the music is supposed to tell you that you're freaking cool and badass in every way. So I love making that sort of music. But I've evolved so much in terms of my ability to produce electronic music now, because it's electronic, much like the Payday soundtrack. But I've taken it further and make something that's so much more polished in terms of the production approach. Like it has more punch to it, and it has more power, and everything is tighter. But it's still not polished in terms of texture, because the music is supposed to be very, distorted and dirty, and have the sort of jagged edges to it, So I'm already working on my dream project, actually.
When's that game coming out? Is that?
It's really hard to say, actually, because the philosophy within 10 Chambers is it's done when it's done. So rather than saying a date, committing to a date, and then maybe making people disappointed when we end up pushing the release, or, feeling forced to release something that is unfinished, which is something you see these days, way too often. We never want to put ourselves in that position. So rather than saying when it's coming out, we just say it's done when it's done. But it is coming out as an early access game at first on Steam, and then we'll see after that.
When a game is a passion project and you kind of just work on it for the sake of wanting to work on it, I think that is when a game is going to be extremely good. So I'm definitely looking forward to getting my hands on that when I can. But
yeah.
Thank you so much for sitting here, Simon. I have actually learned quite a lot about Payday, the development behind it, and the composing soundtracks and doing the voice of Bane. Thank you for the little snippet of Bane, by the way. But yeah, again, thank you so much for sitting here, man. I've learned so much about the franchise, and I'm so glad that you are so willing to just spill information out. I love that, and I really hope that you enjoy watching this interview back once it's edited.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
If you guys want to see more videos like this, then please feel free to comment below. Make sure you like the video as well. And again, thank you so much, Simon, for sitting here and doing this interview with me. It means a lot. Thank you.
Thank you, Samuel.
Right, I'll see you all in the next video. Goodbye.